Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this live webinar. I can see the numbers creeping up thick and fast there. So good morning to you all. Do introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from. Your company name would be good to know as well. And what we'd love to know is if you are creating accessible content at the moment. So let us know in the chat where you're calling in from, your company name, and if you are creating accessible content at the moment. Good morning to those that have just joined. Welcome to this webinar. Good morning. Good morning, Kaylee. Excellent. Kaylee is creating accessible content. Very good. Ruth, trying your very best. We hear that a lot. Great to see you as well from the NHS Trust in the West Midlands. Good morning to those of you that are just joining. Welcome to this webinar. Do let us know where you're calling in from in the chat. And if you're creating accessible content at the moment, that would be great to know as well. Good morning, Lisa. Excellent to have a freelancer on the webinar and you're developing with accessibility in mind. That's what we love to hear. Sasha, very good. It is a challenge, absolutely. Good morning there, everyone. Oh, it's coming in thick and fast now. Good morning, Jodie from the NSPCC, working to create accessible e-learning content. Good. Quite a few of you are mentioning that you're starting your journey. That's excellent. Quite a few of you are hoping to, you're trying your best. Good morning there, Peter. Good morning, Jenna. Good morning, Karen from the Met Police, trying to create accessible e-learning as well. Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll carry on reading those as we make a start. So welcome to this live webinar, Insights from L&D Leaders, Designing Accessible Learning for All. We are using Zoom today, so please just note the features available to you at the bottom of your Zoom panel on your screen. So if you need any live captions, that's where you'll find them as well. It's great to see some familiar names in the chat there. And for those of you that don't know who Omniplex Learning are, we are known as a trusted partner for everything L&D. And we offer a full suite of learning solutions such as Articulate 360, which I know some of you use, as well as Beyond and LMSs and our own certified training, content creation, digital adoption tools, and other professional services. And I know from the chat, I can recognise we've got quite a few customers on today's webinar, and we speak to L&D professionals every single day, and we talk a lot about accessibility to them as well. I've been working at Omniplex Learning for about 5 years now, and I'd say 5 years ago, I found myself having to explain what accessibility meant because that term wasn't as well known back then, whereas now, lots of people we speak to are having that basis knowledge or actually flying with their accessibility journey, which is really nice to see how that's changed over those 5 years. And one thing I think that's in common through all those conversations that we speak to is that people find it challenging, which is what quite a few of you are mentioning in the chat. People are trying their very best with accessibility, and that is an ongoing journey. So you're not alone if they are your own thoughts as well. And we'll talk a lot about that today. My name is Lena and I am the Director of Learning at Omniplex Learning, and I'll be hosting this webinar. But the people that you'll hear the most from today are our panels. So our panelists include Stephen Holderness, who is the Learning and Development Lead at AO. And we also have Lizzie Angell, who is the LLFC consultant at Nationwide. And both Lizzie and Stephen are long-standing customers of Omniplex Learning, and they've been so kind enough to give up their time today to share what they're doing around accessibility at their organisations. So I'm sure lots of you will find that really interesting to hear more about. And also joining our panel is Safi O'Brien. And Safi is a training manager at Omniplex Learning and is a great advocate for accessibility and also trains our customers on accessibility for digital learning. So we have lots to learn from Safi as well. So they can give us a wave. Hopefully you can see their faces and we'll hear from each of them in a little while. We are hosting this webinar to celebrate the 14th Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is often known as GAD, which is actually tomorrow on the 15th of May. And we've celebrated in the past by hosting a Ask a Trainer webinar, or we've shared some resources in the past. And this time we thought a panel would be a great idea. And the purpose of GAD is to get everyone talking, getting everyone thinking and learning about digital access and inclusion, and thinking about those more than 1 billion people with disabilities or impairments worldwide. So I'd encourage you to all talk about accessibility in your workplace after this webinar, just to continue raising that awareness. And it actually really nicely coincides with Learning at Work Week, which is happening this week as well. Their website, the GAD website, is also a fantastic hub for resources and further learning, and you can even host your very own event on there as well if you wanted to. We'll get started on our webinar today by just getting ourselves aligned with what digital learning in accessibility really means, just in case we've got some people on the webinar today that are not as familiar with that. So we'll get a nice sort of basic understanding there. And then our main session will be talking to our panel members about their challenges, their successes, their journey, and their real stories when it comes to accessibility. And then to wrap up today's webinar, we'll talk about how you can continue your accessibility journey. We've got a load of resources to share with you, and then we'll also use have a bit of time there at the end of the session to answer some of your questions. So do use that Q&A box if you have any questions, and we'll do our very best to answer them live towards the end. All right, so let's get started with just getting ourselves aligned with what accessibility actually means, and specifically in the context of digital learning. I quite like this definition here that says accessibility in digital learning means creating content that everyone can easily access, navigate, and engage with, regardless of their individual needs or circumstances. And I love that simplicity, I guess, of that definition. And I think it's quite a good benchmark because it gets you to question if everyone can access your content. Some people have permanent impairments or disabilities, and sometimes it's temporary or even situational. So think about a time where something is playing on your phone with audio and there's no captions available. And because of the situation or the environment you're in, you were hoping you'd have captions there to help you understand that content. Now, there's lots of disabilities and impairments to consider in the wider sense of accessibility. However, when it comes to digital accessibility, there are four main areas that we need to focus on. And that includes people with visual impairments, so things like colour blindness or tunnel vision, as well as partial and full blindness and much more. Audio impairments such as deafness or sensory overload. There's lots of motor impairments, but specifically when it comes to digital learning, we're focusing on those that are unable to use a mouse. So that could be down to having severe arthritis, for example, or a loss of limb, or Parkinson's disease, and much more. And then I think for most of you, for your organisations, you will have employees with cognitive differences, considering 1 in 10 in the UK are dyslexic, and as we probably know, ADHD and autism, etc., are on the rise as well. So cognitive differences are incredibly common. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding of who we're thinking about when it comes to digital accessibility and what it means. And you may also hear from our panel today something known as WCAG, so Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are essentially the framework or guidelines for all of us to adhere to when we are creating digital learning that needs to be accessible. And this framework provides us a guidance around four different areas, and they're often known as POUR, P-O-U-R. And the first part of that guideline consists of content being perceivable, and that means that content can be seen and heard. So as an example, your content should be available in multiple formats, so text, audio, visuals. Operable means that content can be used in multiple forms of input, and that the purpose of the user interface controls are nice and clear. And that means that learners can navigate easily using a keyboard or even some assistive technologies that they might be using. And then we've got understandable. That means that content is presented in a clear and simple manner, and that information should be clear, readable, and structured logically. And then we have robust, which means that content can be worked with all browsers and assistive technology such as screen readers. So these guidelines are what can help you ensure that your digital content is inclusive and it's usable by your learners. And later we'll drop a resource into the chat which lists all of those WCAG criteria for you. And there's only a few examples on the screen, but if you've worked with these guidelines before, you'll know there's quite a long list of criteria there. So hopefully that gets us a little bit aligned with some of the common terms that we might hear through our panel discussion. And before we start asking our panel some questions, I have a question for you. So I'm going to launch a poll and I'd be interested to know what's the biggest barrier to accessibility in L&D for you. So I'll launch that poll now. Let me know what your answer is. If you can't use Zoom polls for whatever reason, feel free to drop the answer into the chat box there. All right, I'll give it another couple of seconds and I'll share those results with you. Excellent. Okay, so we've got, just so you know, about 215 people have answered that poll question. So it's quite a good sample data there, and I'll share those results with you. So you're not alone if you've answered some of those. So 36% of you have said that is a lack of knowledge or training. 42% is down, say it's down to time and resource constraints. 10% say it's unclear internal priorities, and 11% of you say you're not too sure where to start either. So really interesting. Thank you for sharing that information with us. We did ask on LinkedIn as well if you're interested to see those results too. So they're not too dissimilar actually from what you've mentioned there. And through our LinkedIn poll, we found that 38% said it was a lack of knowledge or training, whilst 33% said it was down to time and resource constraints. And then 14% even therefore unclear internal priorities and not sure where to start. So we're going to hand over to our panel now to hear about some of these challenges and what they've done to overcome some of these challenges. And I'll start by asking our panel just to share their journey with accessibility in learning and development. And as we know, it is a journey. Everyone's still on it. We haven't got it completely finessed, but we're working through it. So I'd love to hear from each of our panelists here on that. Shall we start with yourself, Stephen? So Stephen is from AO. Hello, Stephen. Can you share your journey with us?
Yeah, certainly, and thanks for having me, Lena. Yeah, so when I started looking after the learning at AO, the starting point was we really needed to understand where were we at that stage, and we decided the best way to do that was to go and speak to those AOs who had a lived experience. So we sought out people that use screen readers within the business. We have an employee resource group which is all around neurodiversity, so we went and sought people like that to say what was their experience of our learning, what is it we're doing well, because obviously we want to carry on doing that, and where were the opportunities for us to improve what we did with our learning. And then once we'd understood that, we needed to improve our own knowledge. So we sought about attending webinars like today. We attended some training with Safi, which was brilliant. We also then I'm a big believer in learning all kind of continuously. So I sought out podcasts and audio books that could help me on our journey. And once we kind of got grown our understanding and closed some of those blind spots around accessibility, we could then kind of see where we were. So we had some of the tools available that we could go about improving what we did every day. So we started off with simple things. So we a lot of what we did previously were options, and some of those options weren't the easiest to find. So we started making accessibility a standard, and we started thinking about some of the cognitive loads that we could improve. just little things like on our e-learns, our alt text, making sure all those were right. So what we found is when we did a review, is a lot of our alt text was varied. So some of it was really good, some of it wasn't considered at all. There was lots of things in our focus orders. So we looked at our focus orders, and there were things that weren't necessary and didn't need to be there. So some of the feedback we was getting as people was tabbing through, they was having to do a lot of tabs that they didn't need to do, and it wasn't benefiting them in the long run. We looked at our language for our learning. So a lot of our language wasn't plain English, and actually calling a spade is much more useful for the person at the other end of the learning. So yeah, we really looked at that. Text to speech was a big one for us, and we've been on a journey with text to speech. So we have that on all our modules now as standard. So initially we had it as an option to switch on, and over time actually now it's as standard with an option to switch it off. So every one of our modules will read it out. We stopped relying on colour to convey a message. So what we found through a lot of our learning was we was heavily reliant on reds and greens to convey messages. But that wasn't helpful. Was the feedback that we got from people with lived experience. So those people colour blindness didn't know what we wanted them to do. And there's that curse of knowledge in terms of we knew what we wanted users to do, but we wasn't always explicit in what we needed them to do through the module. So we were getting feedback that people thought the module just ended, where actually they had something that we needed them to do, and we just hadn't been clear on that. And so we improved the instruction for everybody. And on our journey, as that we found, if we start with accessibility in mind, and we start considering accessibility from the start, um, everything becomes easier. So as we're going through the testing, and we continue those conversations with people with lived experience, the biggest thing I can advise is test everything. And as we do that, then actually everything gets a bit easier each time, and everything's gradually improving. So we start with kind of small improvements, and if every module we improve one thing, then over time what we found is that our learning is a lot more accessible to a lot more people in the business.
That's brilliant, Stephen. Thank you so much. I think really inspirational as well and really honest. So thank you for sharing. How about yourself, Lizzie, at Nationwide? What's your journey been?
Hiya. Yeah, so for myself, my journey started a few years ago with a project working with a lady who was going blind. I found it really eye-opening. She was able to give really good feedback on things because she could see the screen, she could see what we were trying to achieve, but also use the screen reader. And so yeah, working with her was like really eye-opening to understanding what was needed. Now at Nationwide, we're on a journey to try to make our learning WCAG compliant, but also more than just WCAG, because that only covers like that really like online experience, whereas like the lived world is kind of bigger than that. So we started off doing a full review of the WCAG guidelines. They're a bit technical, quite tricky to get the hang of. But we spent some time like working through them, trying to really understand what they were asking for, seeing what bits we were just like already doing naturally, because there are some bits in there, and then kind of understanding the bits that we weren't doing and really needed to achieve. And alongside that, we were reviewing our content writing, thinking about accessible language, things like select the button rather than click it, like little things like that, and then really using like the tools that are in Word and that to kind of make sure our reading age and reading ease was like checked, and short sentences, how much text is on screen, that kind of thing. And then also the user experience and interface design, thinking about does a button look like a button, those sorts of like layout and design basics. We spoke to a lot of people, and we put out surveys to different communities within the company to ask for feedback, just like Stephen said about really speaking to people and finding out what their experience is and what bits we were getting right and what bits we were getting wrong. And through that, we kind of learnt more about the need for the audio, how much difference that made to so many different people across the company. Whether that was for a whole variety of reasons, but also thinking about those who couldn't access the audio because maybe they're in a branch, they don't get the audio, so needing the text on the screen as well. We're kind of taking it a step at a time, and we haven't got everything right first time, but it's an ongoing journey.
I think that's so important. It is an ongoing journey, and I think, like Stephen, you've also benefited from seeing or witnessing the lived experiences. I think that's such a key part, isn't it? Because there's only so much you can really learn about accessibility. You can read up about it all, but it's only when you see it through somebody else's lens that it really clicks, and that's when the real learning happens. So I love that you both have that in common. It's learning through somebody's lived experiences and seeing what they struggle with. So it helps you become a better designer. Thank you for sharing, Lizzie. And how about yourself, Safi? What's your journey been?
My accessibility journey started at Omniplex Learning because we thought we were searching for new courses and we knew there would be different courses that our learners would benefit from. So personally, I have a massive passion for accessibility. So my son was diagnosed with Asperger's when he was about 8, and that itself was a journey. That's a whole other story. That's another webinar for another time. I also have volunteered for a charity called AbilityNet in my spare time, who help the local community and older people with disabilities kind of get connected to the digital world. So again, like Stephen and Lizzie have said, it's understanding that lived in experience and seeing the real challenges that our learners may face day to day and how we can make things better. So going back to the actual question, Lena, for L&D, as I am the trainer for the articulate accessibility courses here, I've been teaching that for 3 years now, but that's my journey, doing all the research based on my personal kind of want and desire, but also having that kind of understanding of how people really have those challenges, how we can make it better, and how we can kind of make everyone think about accessibility. So I'm always the advocate at Omniplex Learning, aren't I? Telling everyone we need to change this, we need to have that. So, and that is a journey. Yeah, it's always, it's never finished.
Yeah, I think it's, working closely with you, Safi, I've learned so much through your volunteer work as well. You're always sharing, who you were helping over the weekend through AbilityNet.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great way, again, if and to the audience, if you don't have access to somebody at work, to learn through lived experiences, could it be a friend that you know? Could it be a family member? Or could it be where you volunteer and you're helping your community that way, but also learning more about people with lived experiences? And I think that's what you've done there, Safi, so brilliantly. You're helping and giving back to community, but it's also helping your own professional development as well. Brilliant. Thank you all for sharing. I'm interested to hear from our audience here about this question, the next question as well. So do feel free to jump into the chat here and share your story here. But a question to the panel in the meantime as well. What common challenges have you faced when designing accessible digital learning, and how have you addressed them? So yes, absolutely let us know in the chat your answer to this question. But should we start with yourself, Lizzie, on this question here? What common challenges have you faced?
I think the most common challenge is the kind of negative thinking around what this entails. Possibly thinking that courses will be dull, or and not know, and kind of having a barrier as to where to start. Whereas I think if you start with talking to people, and everyone's got some challenge, like I can't use a mouse, so I've got pen, tablet. Everyone's got a something, it could be, you've had an experience where you broke your arm or something, and therefore can't use a mouse for a certain period, or you get migraines trying to read too much text on the screen. And it's kind of thinking about all those kind of grey scales of, like, it's not all extremes, it's everything that's in between. and trying to make things as good as you can, as accessible as you can for the most people, and yeah, just getting and talking to people, and then the challenge becomes fun, and you're thinking about how you're bringing the learning to life for everyone, and I think that's what we're all here for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how about yourself, Safi? What kind of common challenges have you come across?
Well, as I hear a lot from everyone that I train and obviously in the community as well, but definitely, like we saw in the poll today, is the knowledge gaps and lack of awareness of what their systems are capable of. So not only are the authoring tool that you're creating your content in, but what about your learning management system? So it has to live inside a learning management system at the end. That's where your learner's going to consume your content. And a lot of people forget about that because they think solely on the actual software that they're using, but it's also got to have have those discussions about what their learning management systems accessibility journey is, so that you understand what's possible and maybe what you might need to consider. I think, as Lizzie mentioned earlier, about having too much text on screen, I think that's the big one for most people, making it manageable, bite-sized, because nobody wants to see a full slide of text. It kind of just puts you off straight away. But also understanding the guidelines. I think, as you mentioned, the WCAG, I can't remember who said it today, but yeah, they are quite technical and it feels like it's not really a very accessible website, but it has been designed for web developers, so we have to adhere to these guidelines. But I attended LT last month. I'm sure most of you on the call might have also taken a trip down to London. But I attended the only conference meeting which was about accessibility, the only one in the whole conference, hosted by Susie Miller and Accessible Me, which was great, by the way, if anyone else had a chance to watch it. But there was one slide presented. So if we take an example around motion, because I think motion is a lot of people like a little bit of animation. So she had one slide, and you have to picture this because I haven't got the slide myself. There was one slide with person that was looking at the camera, and there was a list of words next to the person's head, but the person was just very subtly moving their head from side to side, just not fast like me shaking my head, but just very slowly. And there was a little bit of that animation, and it was just constant, just very subtle. And as the guideline said, we should not have anything that moves for more than 5 seconds continuously. And we need to provide a function to press pause. But the person that was sitting next to me in the conference said to me, do you know what? I cannot read those words. I know there are words there, but the person that's moving is what my brain is looking at, and I cannot focus on the words at all. So it's just so interesting just to have, again, that experience of someone and those challenges. And yeah, the takeaway here is obviously to make sure that your animation is stoppable or pausable. And that's a
Absolutely.
big challenge.
Thank you for sharing, Safi. I'm just going to pause a moment just to have a little look on the chat as well, and we'll hear from Stephen shortly as well. But open to all three panelists, and I'm happy to chime in here as well. But some of the common challenges that I've been seeing in the chat is around text to speech. Actually, quite a few have mentioned text to speech software, and that being, sounds a bit robotic. It can put learners off, and shoehorning that can be quite difficult. Has anybody got any advice on how to use text to speech in the most appropriate way, especially when it comes to digital learning accessibility?
Yeah, I think for us at AO, text to speech become a big part of it. And what we've found is with text to speech, part of the reason we've done it is actually thinking about accessibility. It's making it accessible for everyone. And one of the big things for us as a business was 29% of our organization like audio learning as the preferred method of learning, so we can almost turn our modules into a podcast for them. So what we've been on is a real journey, and you're absolutely right. Some of the iterations that can come out with text to speech can be well off, and a big thing for any of our learning and on our journey has been that testing element, and the more you test, what you will find is what works and what doesn't, and we've got lots of templates set up, and where actually we know it's certain words can put it in, so we just do a quick find and replace, because we know certain words that come up throughout as a theme throughout our learning, and we can put those in straight away. So AO is a great example. If you put AO together, it does not sound anything like AO. So we can kind of by kind of doing that testing and find what works and what doesn't, then you can make it work for you. And then the voices again, it's testing those. So we will do. Especially when we started the journey, we'd use the different voices and get the feedback on what works for our business and what people liked and what people don't. And when you find the voices that do work, kind of you use those more often. And then as more voices become available, which is happening more often at the moment, then again you trial those through the testing and see do they work for your business or not.
I think it's a really good point. And I think also, real narration, I think I read that in the chat as well. Sometimes you just can't beat it. Real voiceover. People like humans, don't they? And if your toolkit doesn't allow for more natural sounding text to speech, there's some great tools out there like Well Said Labs or Murph AI, 11 Labs as well, where it sounds really a lot more natural. And like you said, Stephen, some people really learn dual coding is so important for them when learning. Seeing something visual but also hearing it can really help retain that knowledge. So I think it's an important consideration there. The other sort of common challenge I'm hearing or seeing here in the chat is around brand. I think it's a really common challenge actually we come across, where brand guidelines don't allow for accessibility, or they don't pass the accessibility criteria, whether it be color palettes or fonts. Has anybody on the panel experienced this or had to overcome that challenge?
Um, we had a new font out last year, I think it was, and there was some issues with it. It was quickly changed and updated by brand, but again, it was that it had to go out for people to realise, and it was around the C and how the C could look like an O because the gap wasn't big enough. And I think until that testing went out, it was hard to spot. But it was very quickly updated to change that.
Yeah.
So and sometimes it might be needing to go back and talk to brand around what is needed.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. You have to communicate and voice those concerns. Stephen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so one of the big things we found when we started was actually using the WCAG color contrast checker. A default position for a lot of people in our organization was green and white because it's our logo, but actually it's not accessible. So what we found is that, but that lack of knowledge around the green and white not being accessible meant it was on most of our learning in our business. So what we've been able to do is kind of work with brand internally to do put out a palette of what colours do blend together and are accessible, and get that message out to our business, and then that feeds into all our templates and all our design principles.
Yeah. And I think also asking, if it's your brand or marketing teams that are responsible, asking them for an accessible color palette. So let's say, for example, you do have a green and that green doesn't work as a contrast on a white. Could that brand team create another shade of green that does pass the color contrast checker, but it still feels on brand? So you're not going completely rogue. I think that's where that communication bit is really important. And that brand team will most likely want to work with you as well. Doing a whole overhaul of a brand is a very big ask. That's probably not going to happen easily or quickly, but having an accessible brand kit is probably something that's a lot more doable for these brand teams. So I think asking, I think that may be something just to take away for those of you that are mentioning it in the chat. How about other challenges, Stephen? We haven't heard from you. What have been your other common challenges that you've come across?
Yeah, so for us, it's I kind of put it into three categories. There's the lack of knowledge, the curse of knowledge, and the lack of testing is where we found most of our challenges. So things like when we put things into testing, the elements didn't work. So we had people using screen readers, and the drag and drop was included, and they weren't able to complete that. We would test on our laptops, the piece of learning, but then when we were getting people to test on the mobile, it wasn't working. So I think historically they'd have probably gone live without that testing, and that's the journey we've been on. People feeding back the language that we use. So the one of the feedback we got from the gent who uses the screen reader is, you tell me to click a lot and I can't click, and it's just annoying. So that was kind of a learning for us. I kind of touched on it before. The instructional design and being really clear what you want people to do. We also removed our time frame, so we've added menus onto everything, and removed any time frames, because people tell us that wasn't helpful, that they kind of they had a limit, or sometimes people process things differently and they need to go back and just reread that they've read, and actually historically that would have been more difficult to do. So having that freedom of movement. And things like captions, making sure there's captions on all our videos and transcripts available. Again, the challenge is it took time to do that, but the outcome of that is that the feedback for our learning, the amount of time that people are spending on our learning, just means it's an easier journey, and kind of the engagement in our overall learning's grown massively as a result of some of the changes we've made with accessibility in mind.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing, Stephen. And we can stay with you on this one, actually, Stephen. And our next question is around sort of common misconceptions about creating accessible content, and open to the audience as well to share your thoughts on this. What common misconceptions have you come across, Stephen?
Firstly, I suppose that accessibility is only for people with disabilities, but actually benefits everyone. So if I take the captions example that I just discussed, it reduces the cognitive load. So a business like ours, we've got contact centre. Actually, we found the transcripts and the captions are really helpful in that environment, because sometimes they can't have the noise on, or it might just be noisy, and actually being able to have the captions on helps that audience as well. The fact that the misconception that it's too time intensive, ultimately, one, it's the right thing to do. Two, it's the law, and it's going to be a lot more time intensive to fix it retrospectively further down the line. Whereby having accessibility in mind and improving a little bit each time as you go, it means it's a much easier job, and you find ways of working and that make it easier each time. And the fact that it limits creativity, I think actually it's the opposite. It causes creativity, because you have to think of other ways of doing things. And if you use the different resources and the inspiration that's out there, you can create some kind of really magical learning that is really accessible as well.
I think that's such an important part as well. I've come across mostly in the public sector, actually, public sector clients, where they're actually really stripping back creativity from an accessibility point of view, and sort of going back to sort of text and images. And as a result, they've seen their completion rates decrease, their satisfaction scores drop, and more importantly, the learning value isn't where it should be. So I think that's such an important point there, Stephen, that just because you're creating accessible content doesn't mean you have to sacrifice creativity for it. Actually, it can push you and encourage you to be even more creative, and thinking about more inclusive learning experiences. How about yourself, Lizzie? What common misconceptions have you come across?
I think very much the same as Stephen. There's a lot of people who say, the learners don't need it, and like Stephen says, it is for everyone. And I think around language and the writing of the courses as well, that if you've gained a job in an industry, then you've got a certain, I don't know, technical language or reading ability. But obviously, if you're in the flow of work and you've got multiple tasks going on, your ability to concentrate is potentially lower. You need the language to be straightforward, to the point, and as Safi said, not like whole screens of text. It needs to be easily accessible, easy to read.
Yeah. I think the last bit of research I read on this was that the average reading age in the UK is 9 years old. So, asking and reading that content, asking yourself, could a 9-year-old understand this? And almost using that as a bit of a, benchmark to test if it's legible enough. Safi, how about yourself? What are your common misconceptions?
Well, unfortunately, I too sadly hear the common phrase, we don't have any people in our company that have disabilities. And I always challenge this, especially with my personal challenge. My son doesn't tell anyone that he has Asperger's. He wants to be treated just the same. And I think that there are so many people in our organisations that have hidden disabilities that are in our current workforce. Even when I was researching before we even started to deliver accessibility training, a couple of people came up to me from the company, and it was quite small at the time, and they said, do you know what, I'm a content developer and I have colour blindness, but I just get, I use my job, I can use the hex codes, it's not a problem. But it's not like you wear a label and you don't tell everyone. A couple of the other people in my organisation also mentioned that they have dyslexia, again, because they don't tell anyone. So I think that there are lots of companies out there that say we don't need to do any accessible, and they kind of just want to push past it, but they don't know all the people that they've got with disabilities. And as I said, most people don't want to disclose it. They just want to be treated normally. And I find that's a little bit of a sad fact, unfortunately. I guess another statement that I hear as well is that we don't need to worry about it unless someone asks for it. And I would say that, again, I'd challenge it, because if someone has to ask for it, you are too late. More likely they've disengaged, you've lost that opportunity. So I think both Stephen and Lizzie have said, thinking about it, accessibility at the beginning of your planning journey is going to help, because it is so hard to retrofit afterwards. And I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, because I know Stephen mentioned that he puts narration on every slide. But another myth is that I would question to have narration on every slide. So I'm happy to be challenged on that, or to have that conversation. But I'd say that to be mindful, as audio needs to be added with a purpose. So it could be good for an explanation or a guide, for instance. But if you are having audio that is saying the same information, because usually if someone is narrating, you might have a couple of bullet points or less text on screen, but the narration might be giving more detail. So in that case, you'll need to have a transcript for that. But if you are duplicating the exact same content, that could be very confusing for someone who's got a screen reader.
Yeah,
That's really important.
I think I'd just say on that, Safi, it's not that I disagree with what you're saying. I think you're right. I think it's got to be right for your organisation.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for us as an organisation, the fact that 29% of people said they like the audio, and it was
Yeah.
through that trialing process that we trialed it with the buttons where you could switch it on. And the instruction on how to do that, and we tried it the other way, and what we found is the feedback that we got of having it on automatically was much more positive for us as an organisation and our workforce for their needs, and actually caused the halo effect. So what we see is that on those modules now, the average consumption time is 10 minutes more. So people are spending around 10 minutes more in the module. And what they're also doing is passing those assessments. So they're getting higher scores and passing them sooner. So yeah, I think having it as a blanket approach for every business absolutely wouldn't be the right thing. But I think for us, and understanding and starting with what's right for our business, that's why we went down that route. Yeah, I think if I went into a different business, I'd probably find a different case and take a different approach.
But you could also just have the ability, as you said, and maybe have a central control at the beginning where the learner decides what setting they choose. And I think that as long as you've got the options, and I think it's all about options, isn't it? And understanding your audience, then you can make it work for a broader, or the broadest audience possible.
I think that's a key thing, isn't it? It's options. It's
Options,
some
yeah.
people may not want sound on at all. They want to turn it off. From a learning psychology point of view, dual coding theory is incredibly impactful, and Stephen's results, demonstrate that actually, that you've got people spending longer on a course with audio. They're, having better pass marks. And then to Safi's point, you don't want the narration duplicating what a screen reader may read as well. So you have to be quite thoughtful with how you add that that audio, sorry, but also giving the learner the options, I think, is really important. It's one of my bugbears when I can't turn something off, or if there isn't the option to turn it on as well. So yeah, I think it's about thinking about everybody, not just what your preference might be, or yeah. Good. Let's talk about another aspect now. Now, this has come up quite a lot in the chat already, so I think lots of people have shared some of their challenges around this. So continue sharing your challenges and successes if you have them. But this is a big point, I think, is, creating accessible content can take longer. We've had real examples being shared in the chat of that. People having to add captions, for example, using a different software, importing it in, that can take longer. How do we manage stakeholder expectations around timelines? Because that can be tricky. Shall we start with yourself, Lizzie? How do you manage expectations?
I think we've been quite lucky so far that the work we've done has fitted in our standard build timelines. We did take time to set up good templates at the start. So I think that's quite a key bit of work to do, is make sure the templates are set up. We have put in extra time for testing, and I think the main bit of management around the stakeholders is the content language and the writing, and the taking time over that piece, and kind of that discussion has been an ongoing one, and something sometimes we're still working on, but like all these things, they're all kind of evolving. So yeah, so far it's all fitted within our timelines. I do think there's more work we need to do, and more rigorous testing with screen readers, which obviously, if you're testing a full course end to end, is quite a big piece of work. We have been working with some screen reader users to get feedback to check that what we're doing is working for them. But yeah, bringing that full testing in-house, I think, is quite a big piece, and is something that we're planning in quite carefully.
Brilliant, thank you. And how about yourself, Stephen?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about setting those expectations early with the stakeholder, and growing that understanding of why it is we're doing what we're doing. Ultimately, a stakeholder puts a request in because they want a high quality piece of learning, and it's no point it being high quality for some people and not others. And I think kind of as long as you're explicit with them in terms of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and there's that mutual understanding, then yeah, that's fine. And I think being clear on those timelines from the start. So yeah, I think where the problems come is if you start saying something's going to take a week and then it takes 3 weeks, as if you can say it's going to take 3 weeks from the start and this is why and this is what the outcome will be, then over time they start to see the benefits of that. So going back to those things that we said before about the test results being passed, more people passing first time, them getting a higher score, the kind of all the feeling metrics, so people kind of leaving positive feedback on the modules, then the more you do that, then the easier the sell becomes. And then kind of when you're going into those conversations, they've probably already had experience of somebody in their team telling them the benefit of that, or another SME telling them about those benefits. So yeah, I think kind of just being really open in your communication to why the time frames, and then making sure that you want to stick to those time frames, then yeah, that it's communication. And I do agree with kind of what Lizzie said, having those templates and having ways of kind of streamlining those processes where it is available is definitely helpful.
Brilliant. And Safi, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, all of the points that both Stephen and
All the
Lizzie have
above.
said, all the above, but educate the stakeholders. I think also one thing, like we've talked about, having that kind of knowledge or lived in experience when you're talking to people that are challenged by their different challenges that they face is that also showing your stakeholders simulations of when content is not accessible and getting them to understand the frustration of learners is really important, because then they also understand where you're trying to make those changes. So for example, we have a sensory lab in our training so that we put people in that kind of non-accessible learning, kind of looking through those different lenses, and many delegates are quite shocked at the outcome. So if you could maybe give that to your stakeholders, they have that understanding, they're more probably going to have a better buy-in for that time that it might take a little bit extra to make the accessible content. Also recommend everyone on the call today taking an afternoon visit to the Google Accessibility Lab. So we did this as a training team exercise. I think it was maybe a little while ago, maybe a year ago. But yeah, very much an insight in accessibility, not just in Google, but in general, how it's developed and how things have changed in the tech world. And awareness is key. So maybe even bring your stakeholders along to that kind of afternoon out. It's free, which is really good. And as Lizzie and both Stephen said, if you can create kind of accessible interactions, then reuse and repurpose them. Use those templates. That they work. You can then kind of just have them in a bank of things that work for you and your organization.
Yeah. I think, key is educating your stakeholders. I think stakeholders would also want to know how much time that you need to create accessible content. So I think to the audience, if you're not doing this already, do consider adding that time up. How long or how much longer is it taking you? So you can then help inform those stakeholders that, actually now this, when we're building in testing, when we're building in all of the WCAG criteria, it's going to take X amount more time than what we would have been doing previously. I was working with a client recently who's been given the exact same time as they had before when they weren't creating accessible content. And as a result, the quality of their courses has suffered. And that's what we don't want, right? We don't want to have that. We'll go backward when it comes to that. So it's really important to, log your time, educate your stakeholders on the fact that it does take more time, because quite frankly, the automation technology just isn't there at the moment when it comes to accessibility and testing. Testing does take time. How about this question here? I think this is a great one. How do you strike a balance between accessibility and creating visually rich, engaging content without compromising the user experience? Lizzie, how do you go about doing that?
I think a lot of good learning experience is about storytelling, which is accessible to everyone. I think we've gone through different interactions then that are useful in the learning, and how to then had discussions around then how to deliver them accessibly, like played around with drag and drops and stuff like that, and what language to use even for people to make it accessible, and explain well how, say with the drag and drop, to complete it with the keyboard, make sure that like we did have some drag and drops that were about completing sentences. And as you say about doing a sensory lab, or if you then try just shutting your eyes and completing that, trying to remember what the sentence has said and then a list of words is actually kind of impossible. So kind of just playing around with those things and going, oh, does this actually work? So yeah, we found problems with some of the ones that we thought were okay initially, and just kind of accepting that it's a learning curve, and that sometimes things that you think are okay, then as you learn more, you kind of realize the errors with, sort of thing, and getting feedback from people on that kind of thing.
Excellent. Safi, what are your thoughts on this? It's the question you get asked a lot in training as well, isn't it?
Yeah, always the one here. And in the past that they've said that they've given a Word document as an accessible kind of resource, which, again, we want to make our content as usable by everyone. So there's lots of accessible features that have been designed for particular access needs, like captions, but also many people find it usable. But for kind of visual, we want to make sure that we still kind of are creating content for the broadest audience. So we mentioned earlier about offering choices. I think choices is really important, and you can be quite clever. So if you're using something like Storyline, you can create a couple of kind of variables that are project wide. And so you give a couple of choices at the beginning. So you still can create those design kind of visual appealing kind of courses, but maybe you can be quite clever with the animations or the being auto played, so you can still reach a broadest audience possible by having those controls, and people can have those settings at the beginning, but you don't compromise your kind of visual element of it.
Excellent. And Stephen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think for me, being creative is about you're going to make mistakes, and it's having an acceptance that you're going to make mistakes, but it's having the mechanisms in place that you capture those mistakes as early as possible, and then use everybody else. So there's loads of resources out there, things like e-learning heroes, articulate templates, go and see what other people are doing, and cherry pick the best. And then when you try that yourself, then yeah, let's say your design will go to another level, but because you're considering accessibility from the beginning and not retrospectively, you will do that in a way that you will make sure it's accessible from the outset. Um, yeah, and then let's say it goes back to that taking the feedback. When you try these things, don't make an assumption because you liked it's going to work for everyone. Keep that feedback loop in with those people with lived experiences, and yeah, let's say what it will do. It goes back to that statement that I said before. It will force you to be more creative, not less.
Yeah, absolutely. I think seeing what's out there is really important. And talking of that, I came across Emma Berry. Some of you may know her. One of my favorite people to follow on LinkedIn. She's a freelancer, and just yesterday, actually, she posted some examples of visually beautiful, accessible storyline content. And I would encourage those of you on the call today, go and check out her post from yesterday. So Emma Berry, and I think she's planning on sharing that as a template as well. So for those of you that use Storyline, I think it's a great example there that accessible content doesn't need to look dull. It doesn't need to be boring. Actually, it can be, on brand. It can look beautiful and striking, as well as accessible as well. All right, and question to the audience here as well, and I love that people are already helping each other in the chat, which is great. And conscious of time, I do want to leave a couple of minutes for questions as well. But any advice that you would provide that you haven't already mentioned already? So, Safi, any advice that you would give for people that are just starting out with accessibility?
Definitely recommend understanding what your software is capable of. Ask your provider for their roadmap. So every software will have their own roadmap for accessibility, and it's always improving. Well, hopefully your software is always improving. So just to let you know as well, I am very happy to share that we've probably seen it on Articulate's roadmap is that I'm testing at the moment, not just me. There is an accessibility checker in Storyline, for example. So it's quite good. I'm still testing it at the moment, but hopefully that's a space to watch for sometime in this year that will be kind of launched. So always look at what your software is doing and think about small steps. I think baby steps, even if you do one thing different, it's going to make a ripple effect. So you might want to join an accessibility group on LinkedIn, and just don't stop learning. Always ask. It's a journey we're all on, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good. How about yourself, Lizzie? Any advice you would give to people that are just starting out?
I think it's just that have a go. Why not? It's better to start and get it wrong, and talk to people and find out those things. I also think it's really helpful to set up a little grid template with your colours on as a reference point. So like our brand is quite accessible, but I still have a little grid that I refer to every day with the colours on and which ones go together and which ones don't, and I find that really helpful. And it's just those little things, and those little things around the user interface design and the journey, the user experience journey through the course. is it clear what buttons are going to do, that kind of thing. That's a great place to start.
Excellent. Brilliant. And Stephen, any advice you would offer?
Yeah, kind of much the same as what Lizzie and Safi have already said about give things a try. Don't be afraid to give them a try. Let's say keep that communication open with people to get that feedback, and start small. And if you start small and just keep building on that and accepting it's a continuous process, then you will kind of create learning that's kind of really accessible but also really inspiring for the end user.
Brilliant. Excellent. And I think just some advice there for people that are, continuing with the journey as well, as Safi said, and all three of you actually, testing and improving your accessibility courses or your courses for accessibility. So, check and test your own courses, get other people to test it for you as well, especially those with lived experiences. Educate and involve your stakeholders. That seems to be a common theme throughout every question, actually. I think that's so important. We need to get those stakeholders on board. And embed accessibility in your design process. Lots of you have mentioned this in the chat as well. It needs to be thought all the way throughout. It can't just be an afterthought. And collaborate with experts and communities. There's lots of support there on LinkedIn, lots of great communities on LinkedIn. Safi mentioned Susie Miller. She really is a fantastic expert on accessibility in the e-learning field, and the Learning Network are doing lots around accessibility recently as well, which is really good. And if you don't have a champion, consider being the champion yourself, in your organisation to improve those experiences for all. It's also great knowledge and skill just to have in the job market at the moment as well. The panel have kindly mentioned lots of resources as they've gone. So do have a look at those in the chat. My colleague is popping those into the chat now. And you'll be able to find things like a WCAG criteria map that we mentioned a little bit earlier. There's also lots of great guides, contrast checker tools, I should say, as well as some information about our training courses as well. I know Safi mentioned a little bit earlier about learning from Google. So Safi and I went, I think it was last year, wasn't it, Safi, that we went to the Google Accessibility Discovery Centre. And I'd recommend, if you're able to get into London, give it a go. I'd highly recommend it. It's free to attend, and you get to experience all different types of assistive technologies. Like Safi and I were racing a car on a game just using our eyes. It was amazing. And one thing Safi and I said as soon as we left actually was that even the biggest tech giants haven't figured it out when it comes to accessibility. And they were really open and honest about that, that they're still on a journey. So, find comfort in that. I think, even tech giants like Google are still working all of that out. We are up to time, but we've still got lots of you on the webinar. So if you're happy to stay on, do stay on, and we'll allow for a couple of questions. We'll answer a few now. There's lots coming in through the Q&A box, but also the chat box there as well. One question I've seen come through the chat as well as the Q&A box is around considerations to keep in mind using video or multimedia in e-learning. Any advice there from the panel? What should we consider or keep in mind when using video or multimedia in e-learning? Do you want to take this one, Saf?
Yeah, I think that you just got to make sure that you are thinking about those 4 digital learning kind of perspectives. So always test, like we've said, but kind of like make sure that you've got captions, make sure you've got transcripts, but also if you are kind of displaying something in your video that's not being spoken, think about audio descriptions as well. So that might be a separate construct that you might need to create or even add it into your caption. So just be mindful that can your learner still understand your learning by just reading what you've written in your captions. So just make sure that none of your messages are being lost with those. If you've got images as well, so if you're using multimedia, just make sure you've got your alternative texts, but only do that if they are meaningful. So not everyone needs to have it all described just because it looks pretty in the background. It's got to convey a message. If you don't have full vision and you're being described lots of things in the background, it's just an overwhelm in sensation of having things read out. Do I need to understand that Stephen has got a green background in his, on his Zoom call, or do I understand that Lena's wearing a black top? It's not going to provide extra learning. So always ask yourself the question, can my learner still understand the learning if that is not being described?
Excellent, thank you. And another question here is, I use Storyline. Do I need to have audio in every slide? Guess it comes a little bit with this question here as well, which is another question, which is text to speech aimed at replacing the need for people using screen readers? Maybe one for you again, Saf, as you were talking about screen readers and text to speech earlier, or Lizzie, unmuted there as well.
What we found with Storyline is it works well with the screen readers, but document readers, which is what a lot of our dyslexic users have, is document readers, and unfortunately that doesn't work so well with Storyline. So we, like Stephen, put the audio and text on every slide from an accessibility point of view. Obviously, you've got different kinds of learning. You've got whether it's a more storytelling thing, in which case maybe you do have different voiceovers, and you've got captions therefore, and therefore not all the text is on the slide. But if you've got more of that narration, then you've got all the text on the slide and the voiceover. It depends what your learning's doing. But yeah, that's what we found.
Yeah, and I think, again, we spoke about it before with kind of the, should we have narration on every slide? I think it's about options. Always give your learner options. I think because what we're trying to do is reach the broadest audience possible. Some people like to have things read out. Some people, like you mentioned, Lizzie, you've got to be understanding of your system. So, for example, Storyline doesn't work well with Dragon, which is the speech to text, where you actually speak to your system about doing what you want to do on your system without using your mouse. You're talking to your system. So there are things that you just need to find out from your own authoring tools about what works well, and provide options for your learners that are going to be consuming your content.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we'll wrap it up there. But if your questions are burning and you haven't had a chance to answer them, let's continue the conversation. So drop us a message on LinkedIn or email us as well, and we'll be happy to answer those. I hope this session has been useful to you and given you insights into accessible design. I want to thank you all for attending, but also Stephen and Lizzie in particular, as two amazing customers, to be so open and honest, sharing their journey and their top tips, which I think has been so valuable. So thank you. And I think a takeaway for everyone is, like I said, Global Accessibility Awareness Day is tomorrow. Use this as an excuse to talk about it in your organisations, if you need an excuse, that is. But continue spreading that awareness, continue talking about it, continue learning more. And like I said, we can continue the conversation on LinkedIn if you want to. Drop us a note, any questions, and also share your key takeaways on LinkedIn. We love to read those as well. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully you'll all have a great day and continue with that journey. Very important journey indeed. Thank you so much.
Later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.